want to thank UK Pony and Rusi for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the subject, that is, tactical nuclear weapons in South Asia, a factor of stability or instability. Now, the test launch of Pakistan of the short-range ballistic missile, namely Nasr, having a range of 60 kilometers on April 19 last year, that is 2011, in order to cover the whole spectrum of threats that the country is facing right now, has raised several dilemmas. This missile renders Pakistan with maybe flexibility in response options. However, whether this missile is going to be a factor of stability or instability in the region requires certain deliberations. Therefore, based on the existing understanding about the TNWs, I attempt to deal with the following issues. First, ensuring military responsiveness that may urge decision makers to use TNWs in early stage of combat situations in geographical close proximity, along with the probability of a breakdown in the nuclear command and control system if the delegation would take place. Second, ensuring the invulnerability of TNWs together with the maintenance of the rigorous C2 system. And third, the deterrent effect of TNWs in the battlefield. In so doing, the strategic environment in South Asia is important to delineate first, so as to contextualize the development of TNWs in the region. The adversarial relationship between India and Pakistan developed during their formative years, as both states had fought 3 major wars. And besides these major wars, both states faced severe crises, including the 1986-87 one and the one on Kashmir in 1990. That occurred actually prior to the overt nuclearization in 1998. 3 major crises of Kargil crisis in 1999, 2001-2 military standoff, and Mumbai crisis 2008 were actually faced by both countries in the post-1998 phase. It is being observed by some scholars that the nuclear factor played a major role in controlling these crises from escalating to a full-scale war. Moreover, both states have developed effective nuclear command and control systems. However, the understanding that has arisen within the region to explore the space for limited conventional war under the nuclear overhang is disturbing. An Indian Coast Guard, or the proactive operations offensive military strategy, is a manifestation of such an understanding. The Indian Army announced its Coast Guard strategy in April 2004 that envisages dividing the Indian Army's offensive thrust into 8 division-sized integrated battle groups, that is IBGs, that would carry out attacks about 50 to 80 kilometers deep against Pakistan, along different axes of advance within 72 to 96 hours once the decision of attack is made. The idea behind this offensive launch is to carry out an offensive in a speedy manner before the international community intervenes, and to leave little response option for Pakistan, thereby catching Pakistan by surprise. However, Pakistan, in response, conducted its own military exercises in 2009 and 10, which are named as Azme-No. Besides this, other developments are equally disturbing. India started its ballistic missile defense flight tests in 2006. However, the success that India has so far made in this regard cannot be accurately assessed, given the associated technological challenges with this system and in the absence of the Indian elaboration of such systems' purpose and architecture in public. Among the likely deployments of the Indian BMD, its deployment to accompany the Indian troops and carry out its cold start operations against Pakistan is likely to aggravate the situation in the region. These developments, along with the other, for example, strengthening the strategic relationships of India with US and other major states, have been time and again expounded by Pakistan as destabilizing for the regional stability. The South Asia currently is now witnessing emerging threats and challenges to its stability. Apart from these mentioned, I have mentioned before, the test launch of the short-range ballistic missiles, for example, Pakistan's Nasr and Indian Pahar, are yet to impact the nuclear stability in the region. Nonetheless, the highlights of such impact can be drawn based on the Cold War understanding about the TNWs and the discourse that has been generated after these launches. Now, the TNWs in South Asia, the press release of the Nasr's test launch on April 19, 2011, as generally understood, illustrates following things. Having range of 60 kilometers, the nuclear-capable Nasr with shoot and scoot capabilities indicate its capability to respond to the need of rapid mobility on the battlefield. Being able to consolidate Pakistan's strategic deterrence capability at all levels of the threat spectrum makes it to deter Indian offensive military strategy, that is cold start. Next, this missile test actually demonstrated the country's technological prowess of miniaturization of the warheads that can be produced, or that warheads of smaller size that can be mounted on the cruise missiles to counter the Indian BMD capability. The missile may likely to be used to counter any threat at sea in future. This miniaturization also indicates towards the likely deployment of atomic artillery on the India-Pakistan border. Subsequently, on July 21, 2011, India test-fired its 150 km per hour missile that is purported as India's ability to win a quick, preemptive war against Pakistan, and a huge boost to India's military doctrine of cold start. The impact of these weapon systems is likely to be challenging for the region. However, looking at the impacts, ensuring military responsiveness and invulnerability of the TNWs. In South Asia, specifically in Pakistan case, the National Command Authority of Pakistan will control the employment of the Nasr. That signifies the centralized command and control system. However, given the range of this missile, that is 60 kilometers, it is likely to be forward deployed. The forward deployment of TNWs is likely to demonstrate states or Pakistan's resolve to deter adversaries' attack, but it also increases the vulnerability of such weapons. Although the purported shallow maneuvering of the IBGs, as the cold start doctrine says, that is to facilitate India in bargaining with Pakistan to acquire some part of the territory. However, it does not refer to such groups as being capable of operating deep beyond the edge of the battle, forward edge of the battle. But still, the vulnerability exists, and that would likely urge Pakistan to use these weapons at the early stage of the conflict, and also to disperse these weapons that can be actually served with the Nasr having shoot and scoot capabilities. However, the possible Pakistan's Nasr response to Indian offensive conventional attack is likely to shift the burden of escalation to India. Next, impact of TNWs in battlefield. Being smaller in size and yield, the usability of TNWs is greater in the battlefield, primarily against the counterforce targets, and may be used in large numbers. Now, conferring upon this option, the possible targets for Pakistan, as the literature suggests, may be Indian conventional forces, including troop formations, armored columns, and forward airfields. Important to mention here is an analysis that was made by an historian about the Pakistan's nuclear threshold that suggests, quote unquote, it is likely that Pakistan would have to accept defeat or employ nuclear weapons if Indian two-armor, heavy mechanized infantry strike corps managed to penetrate to the line joining these three cities of Pakistan. These are the major cities of Pakistan, the Gujranwala, Multan, and Sakhar, and to the outskirts of the Hyderabad in south. Now, these four cities fall in the distance range of about 50 to 190 kilometers of the international border. This analysis highlights the gaps in the Pakistani nuclear deterrence. But Nasser, with 60-kilometer range, is seen as effectively producing deterrent effect to cover these cities from any Indian offensive in the form of mechanized IBGs. However, given the 150-kilometer range of Prahar, that is the Indian missile, these Pakistani cities, except for Multan, that is one city, there is a way, are still vulnerable to Indian offensive. Another point is that the rapid advancement of the Indian IBGs under Cold Start doctrine into Pakistani territory is likely to be made in a battlefield that is purportedly nuclear in nature, given Pakistan's Nasser, that is to cover the whole spectrum of threat. In this way, India will be risking its forces to fight in a nuclear battlefield. The option for Pakistan, as highlighted in different analyses, may be to use low-yield nuclear weapon on Indian Army on its own territory, which, as argued, would self-deter Pakistan to use TNWs on its own soil, and also breaking the nuclear taboo. However, the possible target may not be only the Indian troops on Pakistani soil, but also be on the Indian territory, close to the international border, to generate a radiated battlefield in order to halt the further advancement of Indian forces close to the international border. Such a use in such a scenario might deter both states or both sides from escalating. Meanwhile, the international community may well be in a position to pressurize both states to cease hostilities. However, this kind of limited use against Indian military forces within the battlefield zone could call into question the Indians' nuclear doctrine, which is based on the punitive retaliation against any WMD attack, either on Indian soil or Indian forces anywhere in the world. So looking at these impacts, I want to conclude my discussion. To conclude, I would like to say that the introduction of TNWs in the region is not likely to destabilize, but is likely to invoke new challenges profound for India and Pakistan to address. There exists a lack of clarity in the region, especially in South Asia, about what constitutes a TNW. Therefore, in order to address the challenges emanating from the proposed or purposefully induced ambiguity, the baseline arguments needs to be generated with regards to what constitute a TNW in the South Asian context. Therefore, TNWs in South Asia need to be categorized in terms of their yield, range, and impact, either through some sort of an understanding between the two states. It is also suggested that both states should engage in a doctrinal dialogue in order to collaborate at some point. It is understandable that, to quote an Indian analyst, he actually wrote in his writing that deterrence is bolstered by a capacity and readiness to use military force. Now, having said that, the conclusions drawn by the Desmond Ball about the limited nuclear war option during the Cold War scenario, and the Rodney Jones, which he made the analysis in the South Asian context, the conclusion was to focus more on the conditions of the conventional deterrence. And I feel that conclusion prevailed largely. Thank you.